Hi, my name is Matthew Brading. Today is May 2nd, and I'm going to be interviewing my dad, John Brading. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to help me with this history project.
Of course.
So, the first question I have is where were you born, and what do you remember most about the hometown you grew up in?
I was born in Fort Worth, Texas in 1968. I was born in a small, I don't know if it would be considered a suburb, but it was called White Settlement out by the military base because that's where my father worked at the time. Um, as far as what I remember about it, it was pretty much what you would expect it to be. It was home.
What was your family like as a child? Did you have any siblings, traditions, or special memories?
Very much the nuclear family. It was my father, my mother, and me, and I had one sister who was 3 years older than I. Um, Basic family things: once a year, family vacation, Christmas time, always spent with family at home, and summertime spent with my closest grandparent, which was my mother's family, because she grew up on a farm and they had a wheat farm. So we went up every year in the summer and we would help with harvest.
And who had the biggest influence on you when you were growing up?
I would say, I would like to say my dad, but I think probably my mother, just because I spent more time with my mother. Um, Growing up on a farm, she was very, for lack of a better word, headstrong about how things should be, and she kind of ruled the roost with that mentality. So I would say probably my mother.
And currently, what kind of work do you do now, and what did you do in the past, and how did your career shape your life?
My career has been kind of all over the place. As when I was in high school and college, I worked at movie theaters and video stores because I loved the movies and I loved getting to go to free movies, and I could come and go as I had school. So when I was in town, they would let me work. Whenever I had to go away to school, they would let me take breaks. So it was pretty easy to come and go. Once I got through with school, I worked at car dealerships running the service department. As the dispatcher, I was in charge of assigning all the work to the technicians and keeping the technicians busy and getting the work through the shop as quick as possible. And after that, I moved into the IT field, started with EDS in 98, worked for EDS until Ross Perot sold our entire division to Fiserv, under which we worked as an independent company. Finally, we were absorbed into Fiserv proper, and I've been doing that since 98, so a total of 26, 27 years, somewhere in that ballpark. So right now, that's what I do is network analyst and implementation specialist for credit unions, doing their networks and their infrastructure.
And so now that you kind of work on that as your career, do you remember the first time you used a computer?
Oh man, that would have been, I don't even know what year, but I can tell you my first computer was a Commodore 64. I had me a 9600 baud modem, and I could play video games on it, and I could call into, I guess you would say, early internet, which was BBSs, where you would dial in on a modem and you could see it was basically a bulletin board, and you could see what people posted and talked about. And we thought we were the biggest thing on the planet because we had those computers.
And then back to when you were a kid, what kind of vacations or road trips did your family take?
Vacations, we were very much a once a year big family vacation. So we generally, my parents didn't like to fly. I won't say they didn't like to fly, they didn't want to spend the money to fly. Plus, they kind of enjoyed seeing America. So every vacation that we took, with very few exceptions, like to Mexico, we drove. So by the time I was in high school, I had already covered every state west of the Mississippi with the exception of Alaska and Hawaii. We had gone to numerous parks, and every year we would go somewhere different, and it was just a big thing. We would take either 1 to 2 weeks and load up the car, and we would go.
And then, as I know, you started watching the news more and more. Did you ever used to watch like live coverage of big events like the Olympics or space missions or anything?
When we were younger, it was actually a thing to do that. You didn't have the internet, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have all this mess. So Olympics, huge. Every time the Olympics would come on, everybody would pile around, and not just our family, everybody. I mean, that was always the big topic the next day at school. Christmas specials, Halloween specials, those were huge. You'd start looking in the TV guide at the beginning of December because they only came on once. You couldn't watch them anytime you wanted to. You literally had to catch them the one time they were on TV. So, yes, it was very much a tuned into thing.
And then, because you watched the news, you saw 9/11. Do you remember where you were or how you felt on that day when you saw it on TV?
9/11 was crazy because honestly, I didn't see it on TV per se until quite a bit later. I was working at EDS at the time, and whenever I was driving into work, one of my coworkers called me up to ask me a question, and he asked, "Did you hear about what happened? A plane crashed into the World Trade Center, a little plane." And so I'm thinking like a Cessna, one of those small 2 or 3 person planes. And we got off of the phone, didn't hear anything else about it until I got to work. And while I was at work, everybody started running around talking that a second plane had hit and that it was a passenger plane. And so the entire day was spent just kind of in a weird stupor because all of this was going on right then. I mean, it was very surreal. We brought a TV in, and we probably had 50 people packed into a small conference room, and everybody was just glued to the TV trying to see what was happening, what was going on, because it was just mind-blowing.
And then, could you expand on like how you felt, like what was going on in your mind during that time?
Well, the crazy part is we had just had a baby, so we had a 1-year-old around the house. My wife was at home with him, so I'm hearing about this, and EDS at the time had the largest non-military collection of satellites in the entire world. So when all of this started happening, we were literally put on lockdown at work. I could not go home. I could not leave. And talking to my wife, she was scared. She didn't know what to do. She was, do we stay in town? Do we get out of town? Because nobody knew what was happening. All we knew was we were under attack, and nobody knew how, what, when, where, or why. So being stuck at work, not being allowed to leave until, I want to say it was around 7 or 8 o'clock that night, it was, it was hard because, your wife's calling you and she's terrified, and you don't have anything to tell her except for, I can't leave.
Yeah, that would be scary. And then, do you also remember the fall of the Berlin Wall?
Oh yeah.
I know you were really early 20s.
Yeah, I graduated in 87. The Berlin Wall, if I remember right, that happened around 89 because I was in college. And I remember it was all over the news. It was a huge thing. People were throwing parties because, it was kind of growing up in the 80s. The Cold War was very prevalent. We had nuclear drills in school, which was silly because we would hide our heads under a desk like that's going to save us from a nuclear attack. But, growing up in the midst of the Cold War, Russia bad, America good, it's all drilled into your head. So whenever the Berlin Wall fell, it was like a party. It was like, wow, the bad guys, ding dong, the witch is dead. It's the bad guy's gone.
And then, because you were talking about the Cold War, did growing up during the Cold War affect like how you see the world or America at all?
100%, because during the Cold War, like I say, Russia, communism was very, very bad. That was, what we're taught from day one, that is not the way to govern. That is a bad way to treat your people. Basically, you know, our picture of Russia was bread lines, cold, people standing in line because they didn't have basic necessities, all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, looking back through a different lens now, a lot of it was propaganda. I'm sure a lot of it wasn't. But, you know, everything we were taught and told was that we were the world's savior and they were the worst thing on the planet. So it was, yeah, it definitely shaped things because to this day, it's hard to picture Russia as somebody that, you know, it's they were starting to be, you know, come across as better after the fall, and you know they seem to be moving in quote unquote what we would call the right direction. But I mean, now it's like things are kind of going backwards. And even though it's not the Cold War per se, I see a lot of the same things happening with regards to what we're being shown and, you know, what Russians are being shown according to what, you know, we're being told. You know, they're not allowed to watch news. They're not allowed to have Western influence. They're not allowed to get news or information from anywhere else because the state is governing all of their media. So it's kind of weird in the sense that it's like we've circled back and we're going in that direction again.
So that also kind of ties into my next question of how have your beliefs changed or stayed the same as the country has changed over the decades you've been alive?
Well, I kind of touched on it because it seemed like a lot of the Cold War propaganda that we grew up with had softened after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We started, you know, it seemed like they were starting to take some Western influence. It seemed like they were starting to embrace democracy a little bit more. It wasn't such dictatorial actions over there. But it's very weird because growing up, like I say, we were always the good guys. And how much of that is, you know, what we're spoon fed here versus how the world actually sees us, I couldn't say. But we were always portrayed and we felt like the good guy. We felt like we were always the ones willing to help. We felt like we were the ones willing to protect. We felt like, you know, we were there for anybody that, you know, as long as they weren't treating their people badly, we would, you know, do things to help them. And it's really bizarre because in the last 6 months, it's almost like that is 100% turned around. I've got friends overseas that are like, everybody hates you. Nobody likes America, you know, and the stuff you're seeing in the news is that suddenly we're those guys. We're what, you know, we are to the world what Russia was to us during the Cold War, and it's a very weird, hard pill to swallow that we're going in that direction.
So with that, I'm guessing more concerned, but do you feel more hopeful or more concerned about where the world is heading currently?
I I I feel concerned because I don't like the fact that Russia is doing a land grab in Ukraine. I think that their excuse for the war was extremely silly, extremely fabricated, and very much a imperialist land grab to a certain degree. I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think Putin is ex KGB from the Soviet Union from my time, and he has made it clear time and time again that the breaking up of the Soviet Union is one of the worst things that could have ever happened, and the only way that Russia will ever be strong again is to bring back the glory days of the past. And I think that that's kind of what he's trying to do is to, you know, he's starting with Ukraine, and I think he's going to look for other parts that used to be a piece of the USSR to try to absorb. And I mean, the way the U.S. is treating everybody right now and pulling aid and trying to take this me first, me, myself, and I approach to politics, I think is a bad step because as we pull away our aid and our help and our other things, somebody's going to step into that vacuum. So you have China that is more than willing to step into that vacuum. So at what point is China become, the leading influencer? The dollar is losing value. It's crazy how things are going right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. I've seen some of that too online. Another historic event, that recent one, but how did you experience the COVID-19 pandemic personally and socially? I know for a little bit you had it because for work,
I had it
but
very, very early on, so I had firsthand knowledge of how bad it could be because I was in those very first waves where it was very. I mean, you actually had people dying from it. Um, Again, it's. I mean, even thinking back, it was surreal. You heard about the influenza pandemic way back when and how that went, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's crazy. That could never happen. And then suddenly this happens, and the whole world is shutting down because nobody knows where it came from. Nobody can stop it. Nobody can, people are dying from it left and right. So, yeah, it was something that I honestly never thought that I would see in my lifetime, and possibly nobody would ever see in their lifetime again. Especially with all the advances of modern medicine and where medicine is today, to have something come out of the blue and just shut down the world was crazy to me.
yeah, I never would have expected it either. And then with like the changes in technology over time, with the rise of the internet and everything, did you notice any like major changes or anything like that?
I personally, I feel like there have been a lot of changes, but it's been more social changes. I think people have more access to information, whether that's good or bad. And I think that people are losing a sense of respect and a way of actually interacting with other people because so many people get glued to their phones. So many people would rather go online, play games, sit around and watch videos on YouTube and TikTok. The people are not getting out there. They're not talking to each other. They're not interacting with each other. And when things happen now, I don't think people know how to deal with it. So I think that a lot of it is people overreacting, because it's very different than when I was growing up. When I was growing up, we didn't have any of these things. So you didn't sit at home and watch videos. You had probably 10, 12 channels on the TV to watch, and if there wasn't anything good on, you had to do something else. And now it's instant gratification with everybody and everything, and I think it's a lot of people are losing the ability to interact with the world around them. I don't want to say that, you hear about anxiety and ADHD and, all of these things that people are suffering from. I think people have always suffered from, but I think that more people are suffering from it now because there is none of this human interaction. So when situations arise that they have to be able to react, they don't know how to do it because they haven't grown up interacting with people.
And then, so to expand on that, what do you think the reason is that more people are prone to it? Do you think it's just because of like the
I,
accessibility to
I think a
technology?
lot of it is access. I think a lot of it, and I'm not trying to get up on a soapbox, but I think a lot of it is parenting. I think it's easier to put your kid in front of a TV and let him watch videos and tell everybody, oh, they're educational videos, rather than spending time with them, rather than interacting with them, rather than taking them outside and letting them explore the world and go to the park and play with other kids and learn how to have social interactions. And I think that a lot of it is because the access is there, because it's an immediate gratification thing. Like I say, growing up, we had 13 channels of TV to pick from. And if there wasn't anything there, you had to find a way to entertain yourself. And I don't think kids are doing that at all today. And I don't think they're being made to do that. I don't think they know how to. If there's not something immediately in their face and accessible to them, they don't know what to do. And it freaks them out.
And then finally, what's just a piece of advice you would give someone in this generation and like just currently how the world is?
Pray for it, brother. Pray for it. It's kind of hard to say. I would like to, one of my ongoing philosophies, and it drives my wife absolutely crazy, is, if it's not gonna kill you, if it's not going to permanently maim you, and it's not going to cost you a whole lot of money, you got to let it go. Mistakes are going to happen, and you can't dwell on them. You got to, it's a learning experience. You take the hit, whatever it is, and you got to move on and not keep circling back to what happened, because it's done. It's over. It's gone. Quit worrying about it. Nobody got hurt. Nobody got killed. I mean, is it bad? Does it suck? It's possible, but at the end of the day, it was just something bad that happened. Don't dwell on it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. That's all the questions I had for you today.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.